The yew tree in the walled garden of Birchwood Manor had stood for 3 centuries, older than the house itself, older than the quarrelsome family it sheltered. On the last night of October 1935, its poisonous berries found their final purpose. Lord Archibald Birch was discovered at 23 minutes past midnight, slumped across the library desk, a crystal tumbler overturned, dark brandy bleeding into the blotter like spilled blood. His face was serene, almost smiling as though death had arrived as an old friend wearing a new mask. Chapter 1. The Summons in the Fog. The train from London exhaled a long, weary sigh as it drew into Market Birchington at 23 minutes past 4 on an iron-gray afternoon in late October 1935. Frost glittered on the platform lamps like scattered diamonds. The breath of the single porter hung in the air in small, reluctant clouds. Somewhere in the distance a church bell tolled 5 slow strokes, as though time itself were reluctant to proceed. Hercule Poirot stepped down from the first-class carriage with the delicate precision of a man descending from a throne. Though small of stature, he dominated the scene utterly. The perfectly centered parting in the brilliantined hair, the mustache waxed to rapier points, the fur-collared overcoat that reached almost to his gleaming shoes, the Malacca cane with its amber handle, and most formidable of all, the calm, appraising green eyes that missed nothing. Captain Arthur Hastings followed, laden with 2 pigskin suitcases and a large cardboard box tied with string. He had protested about the box all the way from Baker Street. Really, Poirot, couldn't Mrs. Birch have sent her own car to the station? And what on earth is in this thing? It weighs a ton. Patience, mon cher Hastings. The box contains the essentials of civilization. 1 dozen cravats, my electric hair curler, and a small tin of pâté de foie gras with truffles. One never knows how long one may be marooned in the English countryside. I have suffered the cooking of your aristocracy before. The station master touched his cap. Mr. Poirot, sir, Lady Eleanor's Daimler is waiting beyond the goods yard. Terrible business up at the manor, sir. Terrible. Death is always terrible, monsieur, Poirot replied gravely. But murder is an insult to the intelligence. That is why I am here. The Daimler was long, black and funereal, its chauffeur muffled in a leather coat and gauntlets. The drive to Birchwood Manor took them through dripping beech avenues where the leaves fell in slow, golden spirals. Fog pooled in the hollows like spilled milk. Every gatepost bore the carved crest of the Birch family, a raven clutching a sprig of yew. Hastings shivered. Jolly cheerful place. Observe, Hastings, the yew is the tree of death and resurrection. The ancients planted it in graveyards for that reason. A family that chooses such a badge has either a sense of humor or a sense of doom, sometimes both. At last the house appeared, half Tudor, half Jacobean, a confused architectural dream of chimneys and gables. Black crape already fluttered from the great oak door, and every window on the ground floor was shuttered. The gravel sweep was crowded with vehicles, a Rolls-Royce hearse, 2 police Wolseleys, and a small Austin whose bonnet still ticked with heat. A tall woman in deep mourning stood on the top step as though she had been carved from the same stone as the house. Lady Eleanor Birch was 50, but grief and pride had preserved her like a pressed flower. Her face was pale and aristocratic, the cheekbones sharp, the mouth resolute. Only the eyes betrayed exhaustion. Mr. Poirot. Her voice was low, almost masculine, the voice of a woman accustomed to command. I am indebted to you for coming so quickly. The local police are competent with poachers, but murder... She let the word hang in the cold air like a blade. Poirot bowed with exquisite courtesy. Madam, when a woman of your intelligence begs for the little Belgian detective, I am touched. Permit me to present my friend, Captain Hastings, who records my modest triumphs and occasionally prevents me from being assassinated. Hastings flushed and muttered something about enchanted to be of service. Lady Eleanor did not smile. "Come inside. The chief constable is here, and Inspector Japp arrived from London an hour ago. They are measuring things." The hall was vast and dark, paneled in oak blackened by centuries of smoke. A fire roared in the grate, yet the warmth seemed unable to reach the bones. Ancestral portraits glared down, men in armor, women in farthingales, all with the same hawk-like nose and unforgiving stare. At the foot of the staircase hung a newer portrait in a heavy gilt frame. Lord Archibald Birch at 45, still handsome, his eyes bright with the arrogance of a man who has never been refused anything in life. Poirot paused beneath it. A strong face, one that would not easily forgive betrayal. "Nor receive it," Lady Eleanor said bitterly. "My brother was not a gentle man, Mr. Poirot. But he was the head of this house, and someone poisoned him as casually as one might swat a wasp. I want that someone hanged." She led them across the hall and threw open double doors into the drawing room. The company assembled there rose like guilty schoolchildren. Inspector Japp, square and dogged, gave Poirot a nod that was half welcome, half resentment. "Morning, Mr. Poirot. Didn't expect to see you quite so soon." "Bon matin, Inspecteur." When murder is committed in locked rooms in ancient families, Scotland Yard thinks at once of Hercule Poirot. It is flattering. A younger man in police uniform cleared his throat. "Chief Constable Marchant, sir. We've secured the library. No one in or out since the body was discovered." Poirot inclined his head. "Excellent. And the body?" "Still in situ," Japp said grimly. "Doctor insists on waiting for the Home Office pathologist, but there's no doubt it's poison. Face congested, pupils pinpoint, smell of bitter almonds, except it isn't almonds. Doctor says you, taxine." "You," Poirot repeated softly. "The English tree of death. How appropriate for an English murder." Lady Eleanor rang a small silver bell. The butler appeared, an elderly man whose hands trembled. "Graves, bring coffee for the gentleman, and brandy. I think we all need brandy." While they waited, Poirot's gaze traveled slowly around the room, cataloguing faces the way a jeweler assesses stones. Reginald Birch, the nephew, lounged against the mantelpiece, a cigarette burning forgotten between his fingers. He was handsome in a weak-chinned way, his dinner jacket rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. 32 going on 50. Beside him stood Miss Sylvia Wren, small and fair, her prettiness sharpened by grief or calculation. It was difficult to tell which. A diamond brooch glittered at her throat, too large, too new for mourning. Dr. Miles Cavendish, the family physician, sat a little apart, turning a signet ring on his finger. He was tall, well-groomed, 40 perhaps, with the calm of a man who has seen too many deathbeds to be shocked by one more. And finally, dominating the room by her silence, sat Mrs. Inglethorpe, the housekeeper, upright as a grenadier, her black bombazine rustling like dry leaves. Poirot rubbed his hands together softly. "Bon. Before we visit the library of the crime, let us establish the events of last evening. Lady Eleanor, you telephoned Scotland Yard at what hour?" 12:47 precisely. I looked at the clock when Graves woke me. I came downstairs and found Archibald. You were the first to discover him? Graves and I together. The library door was locked. We had to break it down. Poirot turned to the butler. You observed nothing unusual during the evening? Graves hesitated. His lordship rang for his brandy at 11 o'clock, sir. I took the decanter and one glass on a silver tray, as always. He dismissed me sharply, said he wished to be alone. I locked the door behind me at his request. He often worked late on estate business. Locked from the inside or the outside? Both, sir. There is a bolt on the inside, and I turned the key in the Yale lock as I left. His lordship disliked drafts. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A locked room, always the locked room. And the window? Fastened, sir, and the shutters closed. Yet poison does not walk through keyholes, Poirot murmured. Someone entered that room after 11 o'clock, or the poison was already waiting in the glass. Dr. Cavendish spoke for the first time, his voice smooth, almost soothing. Taxine acts swiftly. 30 minutes, perhaps less. If the U was in the brandy, Lord Archibald poured his own death. Convenient, Poirot said. And who among you benefits from Lord Archibald's death? An electric silence crackled. Reginald laughed unpleasantly. Well, I do, for one. Uncle Archie was about to cut me off without a shilling. 3 bad seasons at Newmarket, you know. Sylvia Wren's voice was small but clear. He broke our engagement in July. Said I was an embarrassment. The allowance stopped the same day. Lady Eleanor's tone could have frozen wine. My brother and I had differences about the future of the estate. He spoke recently of remarrying. A new wife, new children. I have managed Birchwood for 20 years. I would not have enjoyed becoming a pensioner in my own home. Only Dr. Cavendish remained serene. I am merely the doctor. My fees will now go unpaid, I imagine. Poirot surveyed them all with benign satisfaction. Magnifique. We have greed, wounded pride, rejected love, and thwarted ambition, the classic quartet, and somewhere among you walks a murderer who believes himself, or herself, very clever indeed. He turned to Lady Eleanor. Now, madam, take me to your brother. The library lay at the far end of a long corridor paneled in somber oak. 2 constables stood guard outside. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of brandy and something sharper, metallic. The great desk faced the door, its green-shaded lamp still burning though dawn had long since come. Lord Archibald Birch sat slumped forward, head resting on folded arms as though asleep. An overturned crystal tumbler lay in a dark stain that had soaked into the morocco leather. The brandy decanter, half empty, stood beside an open ledger. Poirot moved forward with the reverence of a priest entering a sanctuary. He touched nothing at first, merely looked. Then gently he raised the dead man's head. The face was calm, almost amused, lips curved in a faint sardonic smile. Hastings swallowed. Good Lord, he looks pleased about something. Exactement, Poirot whispered. The smile of the U. Taxine relaxes the facial muscles at the end. The Greeks knew it well. But observe the eyes, Hastings. They are not pleased. They are astonished. Lord Archibald discovered something in his final moments, something that shocked even a man who believed himself beyond shocking. He bent closer. And see here. Beneath the nose, the faintest crust of dried foam. Classic. And on the blotter, these faint scratches made as the pen slipped from dying fingers. Poirot straightened, eyes glittering. This was not suicide. This was execution, and the murderer stood close enough to watch the light fade from those astonished eyes. He turned to the room at large. Now we begin. Outside, the fog pressed thicker against the windows, and somewhere in the walled garden the ancient yew tree stirred its poisonous branches as though listening. Chapter 2. The 5 Who Stood to Gain. The drawing-room at Birchwood Manor was a cavern of crimson damask and ancestral gloom. A pair of electrified candelabra had been switched on, but the light seemed afraid to travel far, as though the shadows themselves resented intrusion. A grandfather clock ticked with the solemnity of a judge pronouncing sentence. Hercule Poirot placed himself with his back to the fire and surveyed the 5 living souls who had most wished Lord Archibald Birch out of the world. He resembled, as Hastings would later remark in his diary, nothing so much as a small, impeccably dressed cat toying with 5 very expensive mice. Mesdames, messieurs, he began, voice silky, let us waste no time on polite fictions. One of you is a poisoner, perhaps more than one. The English are fond of conspiracy, though rarely good at it. We shall proceed with order and method. He raised one manicured finger. First, the question that decides everything, cui bono, who benefits? Reginald Birch stubbed out his Turkish cigarette with unnecessary violence. I do, dash it. Uncle Archie was about to change his will. Again. Last month he caught me signing his name to a check. Only 500, but he took it badly. Said if I darkened his door once more, he'd leave everything to the National Trust and let the house become a home for indigent gentlewomen. Can you imagine anything more ghastly? His laugh was brittle. Poirot noted the tremor in the hand that reached for another cigarette. 500 pounds, Poirot repeated softly. A sum that grows larger the more one owes one's bookmaker. You were heard quarreling violently with his lordship on Tuesday last. Everyone quarrels with Uncle Archie, Reginald muttered. It was practically a family tradition. Poirot's gaze moved to Sylvia Wren. The girl sat very straight on a tapestry chair, hands clenched in her lap so tightly the knuckles showed white. She had been crying, but the tears had dried into hard little salt tracks on her cheeks. Mademoiselle, you were affianced to Lord Birch until July. Then abruptly the engagement ends, the allowance ceases, the presents are returned. One hears whispers of letters, imprudent letters. Sylvia flushed crimson. They were private. Murder makes everything public, Poirot replied, not unkindly. You wrote to a certain captain in the Coldstream Guards. Lord Birch discovered the correspondence. He is said to have been savage. He called me a mercenary little... Well, I shan't repeat it. Her voice shook. I hated him for a week. Then I simply wanted my allowance back. I never wished him dead. Yet death has proved extremely convenient, Poirot observed. The new will, the one that was to disinherit Mr. Reginald, also omitted any legacy to you. With Lord Birch dead intestate for the moment, the previous will stands. You received £10,000 and the pearl necklace he took back. A fortune to a young woman with expensive tastes. Sylvia's eyes filled again. She could not speak. Lady Eleanor Birch had listened in stony silence. Now she spoke, each word falling like a pebble into deep water. My brother and I did not always agree, Mr. Poirot. He was reckless with the estate, reckless with the family name. For 20 years I have kept this house solvent while he played the great lord in London. Last month he announced his intention to marry again. Some widow from Kensington with a squint and 40,000 a year. She would have borne him an heir, and I should have been turned out with a pittance. Yes, I benefit. The estate remains mine to manage until a distant cousin can be found. But I did not poison him. Her gaze dared anyone to contradict her. Poirot bowed slightly. Madam, you are formidable. Formidable women rarely resort to yew-berries, they have subtler weapons. Finally, he turned to Dr. Miles Cavendish, who had been watching the proceedings with the detached interest of a man observing an ant-hill. And you, Doctor? What is your profit in this tragedy? Cavendish smiled, a slow, pleasant smile that did not reach the eyes. None that I can think of, monsieur. My fees will now go unpaid, and I lose a patient I have attended since childhood. Unless, of course, you believe the old rumor that I am Archibald's natural son. He gave a soft laugh. Country houses breed such fairy tales. Poirot's eyebrows rose like theatrical curtains. Do they indeed? How fascinating. He clapped his hands once lightly. Bon, we have 4 excellent motives in one person who claims none. Experience teaches that the one who protests indifference often conceals passion. But let us be systematic. He moved to the mantelpiece and picked up a small silver-framed photograph. Lord Archibald, much younger, arms slung around the shoulders of a dark-haired woman heavy with child. Madame Diana Birch, Poirot said. Dead these 18 years in childbirth. The child, a boy, was said to be stillborn. Yet country houses, as the doctor remarks, breed fairy tales. And sometimes, mes amis, fairy tales have teeth. Cavendish's smile faltered for the first time. Poirot replaced the photograph with deliberate care. We shall now examine alibis. Last evening after dinner, what occurred? Lady Eleanor answered. Bridge in this room until 11:15. Dr. Cavendish was my partner, Miss Wren and Reginald the other. Archibald excused himself at 10:30, saying he had correspondence. He took his brandy in the library, as always. Graves locked the door at Archibald's request. We continued playing until the rubber ended. Then we separated. And you, Doctor, did you leave this room at any time? Only to fetch my cigarette case from the hall table at perhaps 5 minutes to 11. I was gone less than a minute, Reginald snorted. Long enough to nip down the corridor and drop poison in a decanter, what? Cavendish regarded him coolly. If I had wished to kill your uncle, Reginald, I should have chosen a less theatrical method. Digitalis, perhaps, or simply let nature take its course. His heart was failing. Poirot's eyes glittered. Yet you prepared a tonic for him only yesterday. A tonic containing what exactly? Valerian and a little bromide. Perfectly harmless. Perfectly, Poirot echoed. We shall have it analyzed. He turned suddenly to the silent housekeeper who had been standing near the door. Madame Inglethorpe, you have served this family for 30 years. You hear everything, see everything, say nothing. Tell me, did Lord Archibald fear death? The old woman's lips tightened. His lordship feared nothing on earth, sir, except perhaps being forgotten. Poirot nodded slowly. Then the murderer has miscalculated. Lord Archibald will be remembered now every day that his killer walks free. He let the silence stretch until it was unbearable. Very well, he said at last. We have taken the measure of greed, of hatred, of injured pride. Tomorrow we shall take the measure of opportunity. Tonight I recommend that no one sleeps too soundly. Murder once accomplished sometimes acquires the taste for an encore. As the little party broke up, each person avoiding the other's eyes, Poirot caught Dr. Cavendish by the sleeve. A word, Doctor. The yew tree in the walled garden. Its berries are ripe, I observe. Cavendish met his gaze steadily. They have been ripe every October for 300 years, monsieur. Precisely, said Poirot. 300 years is a long time to wait for revenge. Cavendish's smile returned thin and cold. Some of us are patient men, Mr. Poirot. He bowed slightly and left the room. Outside in the corridor, Hastings mopped his brow. I say, old boy, you fairly put the wind up them. Poirot twirled his mustache complacently. Good. Fear loosens tongues, Hastings, and somewhere in this house a tongue is tied in a knot of guilt. Tomorrow we begin to pull the string. From the darkness of the staircase, the portrait of Diana Birch seemed to watch them go, her painted eyes bright with secrets 18 years buried. And in the walled garden, the ancient yew stirred its poisonous branches and whispered to the night. Chapter 3, The Library of Lies. The library door stood open like a wound. 2 constables had been relieved, only a single lamp now burned upon the desk, throwing a cone of green light over the dead man's bowed head. The rest of the room lay in heavy darkness, thick with the scent of brandy, beeswax, and something faintly acrid that clung to the back of the throat. Hercule Poirot entered alone. He closed the door behind him with the soft click of a man shutting the lid of a music box, then stood quite still, letting the silence settle upon him like dust. His eyes, bright and restless, moved in a slow, deliberate arc. Floor, walls, ceiling, windows, fireplace, books. and finally the desk where Lord Archibald Birch had breathed his last. He began with the body. With gloved fingers, he lifted the dead man's chin. Rigor was fully established. The jaw resisted. The faint smile remained fixed and unnatural. Poirot studied it the way a sculptor studies flawed marble. "Tu es surpris, mon vieux," he murmured. "Something astonished you at the end. Was it the taste, or the face of your murderer bending over you?" He released the chin and turned to the overturned glass. A few drops of brandy had run across the leather inset and dried in a dark, crooked line, like a map of some accursed river. Poirot produced a slender glass tube, drew up a sample, stoppered it, and slipped it into his waistcoat pocket. Next, the decanter. Heavy-cut crystal, half full, its stopper lying beside it. Poirot lifted the stopper to his nose. Brandy, certainly, but beneath it the ghost of something sharper, bitter almonds that were not almonds. He allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Taxine," he said aloud. "Distilled, concentrated, and added with loving care. Someone took much trouble for you, my lord." He set the decanter down exactly as he had found it and moved to the window. 6 inches ajar, as Graves had reported. The catch was stiff with disuse. Poirot opened it fully. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. He leaned out. Below lay a 20-foot drop to the gravel path that ringed the house. No ladder marks, no crushed flower bed, no scrape upon the stone sill. He closed the window again and examined the inner sill. A thin, undisturbed film of dust. No one entered or left this way. The shutters, when folded back, revealed the same absence of disturbance. Poirot ran a finger along the brass lock of the Yale, bright, unscratched. The key remained in the lock on the inside. He turned to the fireplace. A coal fire had burned low. The ashes were gray and cold. With a small poker, he stirred them gently. Nothing. Then on the hearth itself, half hidden beneath the fender, something glinted. Poirot knelt, produced tweezers, and retrieved a single strand of pale gold hair. Long, fine, unmistakably a woman's. He held it to the lamp. "Interessant. Miss Wren is fair. Lady Eleanor's hair is silvered. The maids wear caps. Whose, then?" He wrapped the hair in tissue and pocketed it. Now the desk blotter. The spilled brandy had soaked through to reveal faint indentations from the previous page. Poirot tilted the green-shaded lamp and read the ghostly impression. "If I die before morning, let no one mourn. The sins of 1917 have come home at last." He read it twice, lips moving silently. Then he opened the leather-bound journal that lay beside the dead man's hand. The final entry, written in a once firm hand now wandering across the page, was dated yesterday. "Cavendish knows. Must make provision before it is too late. Eleanor will fight, but blood is blood." The last word trailed off into a wild scrawl as the pen had fallen. Poirot closed the journal softly, as though closing the eyes of the dead. 1917, he repeated. The year Madame Diana died, the year a child was supposedly lost. And now, 18 years later, blood returns to claim its inheritance. He moved to the bookshelves. One section, natural history, botany, toxicology, stood slightly proud. Poirot pulled it forward. The shelf swung out on concealed hinges, revealing a small wall safe. The door stood ajar. Inside, nothing but a faint smell of cedar and a single yew-berry, glossy and purple, deliberately placed in the center like a jewel on black velvet. Poirot regarded it for a long moment. Someone wishes me to believe the poison came from within the room itself, but no, too theatrical. The berry is fresh. It has not dried. Placed tonight, after the police search. He left the berry where it was and closed the safe. A soft knock sounded. Inspector Japp entered, rubbing cold hands. "Well, Mr. Poirot?" The chief constable's getting restless, wants to move the body. In a moment, mon ami. Tell me, what did the servants see? Japp consulted his notebook. Nothing as usual. Kitchen maid heard his lordship ring once at 11 sharp. Graves answered with the brandy tray. Footman saw Dr. Cavendish go to the cloakroom at 5 to 11, back within a minute. Lady Eleanor and Miss Wren were dummy partners at bridge. They never left the drawing room. Reginald Birch claims he was in the billiard room alone from 10:30 practicing cannons. No one can confirm. And the library door was found bolted on the inside? Bolt and Yale lock both fast. Had to break the blessed thing down. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yet a door may be bolted from the outside, given string, a pencil, and a steady hand. Observe. From his pocket he produced a length of twine and a pencil. In 30 seconds he demonstrated how the bolt could be drawn back after the murderer left. The string then pulled free through the crack beneath the door. Japp whistled. Neat. But it still doesn't tell us who. Patience. First we establish how, then why, then who. Poirot returned to the desk and lifted the green-shaded lamp entirely away. Beneath it, almost invisible against the dark leather, lay a faint circular stain, smaller than the spilled brandy, perfectly round. He touched it delicately, slightly tacky still. Crème de menthe, he announced. Someone placed a glass here earlier tonight, after the murder, while the body was discovered and the household in chaos. A visitor who helped themselves to a liqueur while contemplating their handiwork. Careless. Japp stared. You can smell that through brandy and you? I, Japp, can smell a lie at 50 paces. Crème de menthe is merely an amuse-bouche. He straightened, eyes glittering in the lamplight. This room has told me 3 lies tonight. First, that the window was the means of entry. Second, that the poison was prepared here. Third, that the murderer left no trace of satisfaction. He looked once more at the smiling corpse. Your astonishment interests me enormously, my lord. You recognized your killer, n'est-ce pas? And you understood at the last why death had come wearing so familiar a face. Poirot turned to Japp. Have the body removed now. But first, photograph the desk exactly as it is, and seal the decanter. Tomorrow we test everything. Tonight I think someone in this house will lie awake and listen to the ticking of a clock that counts down to exposure. As they left the library, Poirot paused in the doorway and looked back. Bonsoir, Lord Archibald. Your sins, it seems, were greater than even you knew. But Hercule Poirot is a patient confessor. The door closed. In the sudden darkness, the dead man's smile seemed wider than ever, as though he had just heard a particularly good joke at his own expense. Chapter 4. The yew in the raven dawn crept over Birchwood Manor like a guilty thing, pale and reluctant. A thin mist clung to the lawns, turning the clipped yew hedges into crouching animals. Hercule Poirot, wrapped in an enormous camel-hair coat and a white silk scarf that would have shamed a Mayfair dandy, stepped through the French doors of the breakfast room and made his way toward the walled garden. Behind him, Captain Hastings hurried, half-eaten toast in one hand, field glasses bumping against his chest. You're certain we must do this before coffee, old chap? Mon pauvre Hastings, coffee is for civilized hours. Murder prefers the cold light of morning when the soul is naked and the lies have not yet been dressed. They followed a gravel path that curved behind the stables. The walled garden lay at the far end, an ancient square of brick and stone built in the reign of Queen Anne and scarcely altered since. A wrought-iron gate, green with verdigris, stood ajar. Above it, carved into the keystone, was the birch crest, a raven clutching a spray of yew. The famous tree dominated the center, A vast, drooping monster, its trunk split into three great arms that swept the ground like a mourning woman's sleeves. Its bark was red as flayed flesh, its needles dark and oily. The berries, blood-bright, hung in heavy clusters. Poirot halted beneath the lowest branch and looked up. 300 ans, he murmured. 3 centuries of poison. The Druids worshipped it. The church planted it in graveyards to remind the living of mortality, and the Birch family chose it for their badge. One must admire the consistency. Hastings shivered. Ghastly thing. Smells like a chemist's shop. Taxus baccata, every part lethal except the red flesh of the berry. The seed within kills a horse in minutes. A man needs only a teaspoon of distilled extract. He moved slowly around the tree, eyes on the ground. The grass was still silvered with dew. Every footstep showed black. Here, he said suddenly. 2 sets of prints led from the gate to the trunk. One was a man's heavy brogue, Reginald's perhaps, or the gardener's. The other was smaller, narrow, unmistakably a woman's court shoe with a louis heel. They stopped directly beneath the lowest branch. There the earth had been disturbed. A dozen berries lay crushed, their purple juice staining the grass like spilled ink. But only one set of prints continued, away from the tree toward the potting shed. None returned. Hastings whistled. Whoever came here left by another gate, or flew, or wished us to believe a woman gathered berries and then vanished like a witch. Observe. The heel marks are unnaturally deep, as though the lady stood on tiptoe to reach the higher clusters. Yet plenty of berries hang lower. Non, this is theater. A harsh croak made them both start. On the grass a few yards away lay a raven, wings spread, quite dead. Its beak and tongue were stained the same violent purple. "Good Lord!" Hastings exclaimed. Poirot knelt, gloved. "Our family mascot, dead of taxine, I would wager. The crop will be full of seeds." He produced a pocket knife and deftly opened the bird. Inside were half a dozen crushed berries and something else, a scrap of pale green rubber, torn and blood-flecked. "Part of a surgical glove," Poirot said softly. The murderer gathered berries wearing gloves, then fed them to the raven to create a pretty tableau. But one finger tore. Careless again. He rose and followed the single line of prints to the potting shed. The door hung open. Inside smelled of leaf mold and kerosene. On the bench lay a brass pestle and mortar. The mortar still held a sticky purple residue. Beside it a cracked spode cup containing a pinch of coarse green-black powder, yew needles and seeds pounded fine. In the cup's saucer lay a scrap of paper torn from a cheap notebook. The writing was hurried, feminine, beginning mid-sentence. "Forgive me, but he must not change the will again. If he marries that woman, everything is lost. I have the means now." S. Hastings read over Poirot's shoulder. Sylvia Wren, the initial, the feminine hand. She was here. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Perhaps. Or someone wishes us to believe so. This paper is from a 5-shilling pad sold in every village shop. The ink is Stevens blue-black, common as rain. And the cup, look, it is from the servants' breakfast service. Anyone in the house could have placed it. He wrapped the note and the rubber fragment in separate envelopes. "Still," Hastings persisted, "Sylvia threatened suicide with yew berries only last month. Lady Eleanor told me, said the girl was hysterical." "Threats of suicide are the currency of the young and desperate," Poirot replied. "Murder is another coin entirely. Come." They returned to the yew. Poirot stood beneath the branch where the footprints ended and looked up. A strand of pale gold hair, identical to the one found in the library, fluttered from a twig, caught there like a deliberate signal. "Again the fair hair," Poirot murmured. Yet Sylvia Wren's is bobbed and curled. This is long, straight. Someone is weaving a noose of gold for the wrong neck. A sudden gust of wind rattled the branches. More berries fell, bouncing like drops of fresh blood. One struck Hastings on the cheek. He flinched as though scalded. Poirot's gaze traveled to the far wall. A small postern gate, almost hidden by ivy, stood ajar. Beyond it lay the kitchen yard. "The second exit," Poirot said. "Our phantom lady came in by the main gate, performed her charade beneath the tree, and left by the servants' way. All arranged for our benefit after the murder. But why? To point suspicion at Sylvia?" Hastings suggested. "Or away from the real murderer. Red herrings, mon ami, are the murderer's calling card. And this one positively shouts." He turned back to the raven. "Bag the bird, Hastings. The stomach contents will interest the Home Office pathologist. And have Japs search the dustbins for the rest of the glove." As they walked back toward the house, the sun finally broke through, striking the used berries into sudden, malevolent fire. Poirot paused at the gate and looked back. Beautiful, is it not? Death wearing its Sunday best. Somewhere in this garden a murderer has danced beneath these branches, believing himself very clever. But the yew keeps its own counsel, and sooner or later it always betrays those who trust its poison. Hastings glanced nervously at the tree. "You talk as if it were alive." "It has outlived every murderer who ever sheltered beneath it," Poirot replied. "In the end, Hastings, even the cleverest killer is only a man. The tree is eternal." Behind them, the raven lay on its back, black wings spread like a crucifix, purple tongue protruding in grotesque accusation. The yew swayed gently as though bowing to an old acquaintance. Chapter 5. The Will in the Wall. The house woke to a morning of thin, reluctant sunshine. Fires were lit, trays carried, shutters thrown back. Yet Birchwood Manor still felt like a mausoleum wearing daylight as a badly fitting mask. Hercule Poirot took his café au lait in the morning room, standing because the chairs were too deep for a man of his stature. He had refused the traditional English breakfast with quiet horror. Hastings, on the other hand, was making steady progress through deviled kidneys and a mound of toast. At 9 o'clock precisely, Inspector Japp knocked and entered, carrying a large manila envelope. "Morning, gentlemen. The chief constable's pathologist is upstairs now. Confirms tax scene, massive dose, death between 11:15 and 11:45, and we've found something." He laid the envelope on the table. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper, watermarked 1935, folded once. The handwriting was Lord Archibald Birch's, spidery but unmistakable. Poirot read aloud, "To my solicitors, Messrs. Greystone and Greystone, Lincoln's Inn. Should this reach you after my death, know that I have executed a new will dated 29th of October 1935, revoking all previous instruments. I leave the entirety of my real and personal estate to my only surviving son, born out of wedlock to my late wife Diana on 14th February 1917, and now practicing medicine in this county. His name appears in the sealed codicil lodged with you this day. Let no one contest this. Blood must answer to blood, however late. Archibald Birch." Witnessed, Miles Cavendish, M.D. Eleanor Birch. Poirot's eyebrows performed their celebrated assent. "Dated 3 days ago, and witnessed by the very doctor who now inherits everything." Hastings choked on his toast. "Cavendish? Good Lord!" "Precisely. The quiet, disinterested physician is suddenly the prodigal son returned. One wonders why Lord Archibald waited 18 years to acknowledge him." Japp produced a second, smaller paper. This was pinned to the underside of the desk drawer. Same handwriting, same date. It was shorter. "Eleanor will fight. She always believed the boy died with Diana. She paid the midwife well. But I have proof now. Cavendish has the birth register. Tonight, I tell him. Poirot folded the note with delicate precision. So, the sins of 1917 are no longer buried. Lady Eleanor arranged a stillbirth that was not still. Dr. Cavendish, raised in secrecy, perhaps even abroad, returns as family friend, waits patiently, and finally his father is ready to claim him publicly. Then, before the new will can be signed in proper form, the father dies. Convenient, none? At that moment the door opened. Lady Eleanor entered dressed in charcoal silk, her face composed into a mask of aristocratic ice. "You wish to see me, Mr. Poirot?" "Madame, a discovery." He handed her the two documents. She read them without a flicker. Only the pulse beating at her temple betrayed her. "Archibald was always theatrical," she said at last. "He threatened this years ago when he first suspected Miles might be alive. I told him then that no byblow would ever inherit Birchland. I told him again last week." "And the midwife?" Poirot asked gently. "Paid, as he says. She died in the influenza of 1919. There is no proof, except perhaps the living proof who poured your brother's brandy last night." Lady Eleanor's eyes blazed. "You accuse Miles Cavendish?" "I accuse no one, madam. I merely arrange the facts in their proper order. Fact 1. A son believed dead lives. Fact 2. The father intends to disinherit everyone else. Fact 3. The father dies before the new will is fully executed. Fact 4. The only witness to the new will is the chief beneficiary. You will agree it is, suggestive." She crushed the papers in her hand. "Suggestive? It is monstrous. Miles has attended this family for 15 years. He nursed Diana when she miscarried twice before. He was here the night she died. If anyone knew the truth, it was he." "Exactly," Poirot murmured. Lady Eleanor stared at him, the realization breaking over her like cold water. "You think he has waited all this time?" "Revenge, madam, is a dish that improves with keeping, and inheritance sweetens it wonderfully." She sat down suddenly as though her legs had betrayed her. "I swear to you, Mr. Poirot, the child was blue when the midwife lifted him. I saw it myself. Archibald was in France. I made the arrangements to spare the family shame. If the boy lived, if someone substituted another infant—" She broke off, pressing a hand to her mouth. Poirot's voice softened. "Grief and pride are powerful midwives, madam. They can deliver many things besides babies." The door opened again. Dr. Cavendish entered, calm as ever, carrying his black bag. "Lady Eleanor, the pathologist is ready." He stopped, sensing the atmosphere. His gaze fell on the crumpled papers in her lap. Something flickered across his face, too quickly to be read. Poirot turned to him with terrifying courtesy. "Docteur, felicitations. It appears you are a very rich man, provided, of course, that this new will is upheld. A pity the original is missing." Cavendish's smile did not waver. "Missing? How unfortunate. But Lord Birch spoke to me of his intentions only last week. I advised him to see his solicitor at once. He said he preferred to keep it private for the present." "Private?" Poirot echoed. "Like the birth you attended in 1917? Tell me, docteur, when did you first learn that you yourself were the infant everyone believed dead?" The silence was absolute. Even the clocks seemed to stop. Cavendish set down his bag with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly level. "I learned it from my foster mother on her deathbed in 1929. She had been the midwife's sister. There was a locket, Diana's, with a curl of hair and a note in Archibald's handwriting. I came here originally to confront him. Instead, I found a sick man who needed a doctor. I stayed. And waited," Poirot said softly. "And waited. Cavendish agreed. Patience is the one virtue orphan asylums teach thoroughly. Lady Eleanor rose, trembling. You sat at my table, took my money, listened to my confidences. I listened to a woman who condemned a child to oblivion for the sake of a name, he said almost gently. But I did not kill him, Eleanor. I wanted him alive and forced to look at me across the breakfast table every morning, knowing what he had done. Death was too merciful. Poirot watched him closely. Yet death came, and with it a fortune. Cavendish met his eyes. Believe me or not, monsieur, I have no need of Birch money. I have my profession. What I wanted was acknowledgement. He was on the verge of giving it. Why should I spoil that with poison? Because acknowledgement without inheritance is a hollow victory, Poirot replied. And because some men prefer revenge to be total. He turned to Japp. Inspecteur, I think we must search Dr. Cavendish's room, and the surgery, and perhaps the boot of his motor car. One never knows where a missing will may be hidden. Cavendish inclined his head, almost amused. Search away, monsieur. You will find morphine, laudanum, and a great deal of very dull medical correspondence. But no will. As Japp led him away, Lady Eleanor sank back into her chair, suddenly an old woman. If Miles is innocent, she whispered, then who destroyed that will, and who poisoned my brother? Poirot patted her hand with surprising gentleness. Patience, madam. Someone in this house is terrified that the past is catching up. Terrified enough to kill, and terrified enough perhaps to make mistakes. He glanced toward the window. In the walled garden, the ancient yews swayed, as though nodding in agreement. Chapter 6. The locked room. Re-examine midnight again. The house slept uneasily, the way a fever patient turns and mutters. Only one room blazed with light, the library where Lord Archibald Birch had died 36 hours earlier. Hercule Poirot had dismissed the constable on duty with a courteous nod and a murmur about les petites cellules grises qui ont besoin de solitude. Now the door was locked once more, this time from the inside, and 3 men stood in the cone of the green-shaded desk lamp. Poirot, Hastings, and a reluctant Inspector Japp. Poirot had arranged the stage with theatrical care. The overturned brandy glass had been righted and refilled with cold tea the color of brandy. The decanter stood half full. The dead man's chair was empty, pushed back exactly as the body had left it. Even the spilled stain on the blotter had been recreated with a damp tea bag. Mon Dieu, it is macabre, Hastings protested. It is necessary, Poirot replied. To solve a locked-room murder, one must become the murderer for 10 minutes. Observe. He moved to the door and demonstrated once again the trick with string and pencil that allowed the bolt to be drawn from the corridor after the killer left. Japp, who had seen it twice already, merely grunted. Neat enough, he admitted, but it still doesn't tell us who had the nerve to stand here and watch him die. Poirot's eyes glittered. That is the entire point, mon ami. Someone did not merely leave the poison and flee. Someone stayed. He picked up the brandy glass, swirled it, and held it to the lamp. Lord Birch was a creature of iron habit. Every night at 11 sharp he rang for Graves. Every night he poured exactly 2 inches of brandy, no more, no less, into this very glass. Graves confirmed it this afternoon. The decanter was filled to the usual mark yesterday morning. Yet when we found it, it was half empty. Someone refilled it during the day with poisoned spirit, knowing his lordship would pour his own nightcap. Hastings frowned. Then the murderer didn't need to enter the library at all after 11. No. But someone did enter. Look. Poirot pointed to the carpet near the fireplace. In the strong lamplight, a faint dual track was visible. 2 shallow depressions leading from the door to the desk and back again. Casters, Jap said, from the small table by the sofa. Exactement, the table that now stands in the bay window. Someone moved it here, sat opposite Lord Birch, and talked to him while he drank. He pulled the table into position. The caster marks lined up perfectly. Imagine the scene, Poirot continued, voice low and compelling. 11 o'clock. Graves has been dismissed. The house believes his lordship is alone. The door is locked and bolted for his privacy, he says. Yet a soft knock, a familiar voice. One last word, Archibald. He rises, opens the bolt, admits his visitor. They sit here by the fire. Brandy is offered. Refused, perhaps. Conversation becomes urgent. Lord Birch, nervous or conciliatory, pours his usual measure. He drinks. They continue to talk. Within minutes, the poison begins its work. Convulsions are masked by the high wings of the chair. The visitor watches, calm, perhaps even tender. When it is over, the glass is overturned to suggest accident or suicide. The table is returned to the window, the string and pencil trick is performed, and the murderer walks away. Hastings swallowed. Good Lord, cold-blooded. More than cold-blooded, mon ami. Intimate. This was no stranger. This was someone Lord Birch trusted enough to unbolt his door at 11 at night. Someone he offered brandy to. Someone he was willing to face across a desk while he signed his own death warrant. Jap rubbed his chin. That narrows it considerably. Family only, I'd say. Or the doctor. Poirot nodded. And now the most illuminating detail of all. He crossed to the mantelpiece and lifted down a small silver cigarette box. Inside lay 3 cigarette ends, 2 gold-tipped Turkish, Reginald's brand, and 1 plain unfiltered stained faintly green at the tip. Creme de menthe again? Poirot announced. The visitor helped himself to a liqueur while Lord Birch died. One does not do that with a hostile stranger. One does it with someone one has known for years. Someone one almost pities. He replaced the box and moved to the window. With a dramatic flourish, he flung the casement wide. Cold air rushed in. Notice, he said, the window is now closed and fastened as it was found. Yet earlier today I discovered a scratch on the outer sill, fresh, bright metal. Someone opened this window after death, then closed it again. To suggest entry from outside? Jap asked. Precisely. But the dust on the inner sill remains undisturbed, and there are no footprints in the flower bed below. Another piece of theater. Poirot shut the window and turned back to the room, eyes shining with excitement. Now we know how the murderer entered and left. We know he or she sat here for perhaps 20 minutes watching the poison work. We know the decanter was tampered with earlier in the day, and we know the victim was astonished at the end. He tapped the journal, open at the fatal entry. Cavendish knows, must make provision. Lord Birch wrote those words yesterday afternoon, then underlined them 3 times. At 11 o'clock last night, he was ready to tell Dr. Cavendish everything, to acknowledge his son at last. Instead, someone else arrived first. Hastings stared. You mean the murderer knew about the new will and struck before it could be finalized? Or, Poirot said softly, the murderer was Dr. Cavendish himself, and the conversation was rather different from the one Lord Birch expected. Jap whistled. That would fit. Cavendish has the medical knowledge, the motive, the opportunity, and the cool nerve, Poirot finished, to sit opposite a dying man smoking a cigarette soaked in creme de menthe, watching the taxine convulsions, then stage a locked-room mystery for our benefit. Yes, it would fit perfectly. He looked around the library one last time, almost affectionately. This room has told us everything except the one thing we still need, proof. But proof, mes amis, is a shy creature. It hides until the moment is ripe. He extinguished the desk lamp. In the sudden darkness, the outlines of furniture loomed like coffins. Come. Tomorrow we set the trap. Tonight let the murderer sleep if he can. As they stepped into the corridor, the bolt clicked home behind them with ironic finality. Somewhere in the sleeping house a clock struck one, and beneath the ancient yew in the walled garden the wind moved through poisonous branches with a sound very like low, satisfied laughter. Chapter 7. The Confession That Wasn't. The morning room at Birchwood Manor had become a court of inquiry. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, striking dust motes into gold, yet the air felt thick, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Poirot had arranged the chairs in a precise half-circle. At the focus stood a small table bearing the objects he had collected like a magpie of death. The torn scrap of rubber glove, the woman's gold hair in its glassine envelope, the spode cup with its purple residue, the note ending in S, and most damning, the raven, stiff and accusing, in a covered wicker cage. One by one they entered. First Sylvia Wren, pale as paper, eyes red-rimmed, then Reginald Birch, unshaven, smelling faintly of last night's whiskey. Lady Eleanor followed, upright as a queen about to be beheaded. Last came Dr. Miles Cavendish, immaculate in a charcoal suit, the perfect mourning of a man who has calculated every stitch. Poirot did not ask them to sit. He wanted them standing, off balance. Mesdames, messieurs, he began pleasantly, we have reached the moment of truth. One of you poisoned Lord Archibald Birch with taxine distilled from the yew in the walled garden. One of you sat opposite him while he died. One of you staged a pretty charade with footprints, a dead raven, and a torn glove to make us chase phantoms. Today the chase ends. He picked up the note. We begin with Mademoiselle Wren. Sylvia gave a small broken cry. I knew it would come to this. Yesterday, Poirot continued, we found this in the potting shed. He must not change the will again. I have the means now. S. Your initial, mademoiselle, your desperation. Sylvia's hands flew to her face. Yes, I wrote it. I went to the shed on Wednesday night, 2 nights before he died. I was going to take my own life with the yew. I ground the berries, I filled that horrible cup. Then I sat on the bench and cried until I was sick. But I couldn't do it. I left everything there and ran back to the house. Someone must have found it later and used it. Her voice cracked. I swear on my mother's grave I never went near the library that night. Poirot studied her for a long moment. The tears were untidy, the nose red, the confession too raw for performance. He believed her. Very well, he said gently. You are a very foolish young woman, but not a poisoner. You may go. Sylvia fled, sobbing. Reginald lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. My turn, I suppose. Yes, I was in Queer Street. Uncle Archie had proof I forged his name. Not 500, Poirot, 5,000. He was going to the police on Monday. I'd have gone to prison, but I didn't kill him. I was in the billiard room all evening, practicing cannons and drinking his whiskey. Alone. No alibi. Rotten luck. He gave a humorless laugh. If I'd known how easy it is to tamper with a decanter, I might have tried it years ago. But I didn't. Poirot's gaze was wintry. You are a young man who mistakes bravado for innocence, monsieur. We shall see. Reginald shrugged and sauntered out, trying to look unconcerned. The door slammed behind him. Lady Eleanor remained motionless. And I suppose I am next. I have no convenient hysterics to offer, Mr. Poirot. Yes, I knew about the new will. Yes, I would have fought it with every breath and every penny. I have spent 20 years keeping this estate from ruin while my brother gambled and whored in London. I was not going to be turned out at 50 for a bastard who had waited 18 years to claim his birthright. Her voice shook with fury, not fear. But I did not poison him. I played bridge until 11:15. Dr. Cavendish was my partner. Miss Wren and Reginald the opposing pair. We were all in the drawing room together. You cannot break that alibi. Poirot inclined his head. I do not need to break it, madame. I need only to look at the one person who could leave the table without suspicion. His eyes turned to Dr. Cavendish. The doctor met the stare calmly. Naturally, I am the convenient villain, the cuckoo in the nest. I leave the bridge table for precisely 1 minute to fetch my cigarette case. Long enough, you suggest, to slip down the corridor, add poison to a decanter, return and resume play as though nothing had happened. Except the decanter was tampered with hours earlier, was it not? Your own reconstruction proved that. True, Poirot conceded. But the person who sat with Lord Birch while he died, who smoked a cigarette soaked in crème de menthe and watched the convulsions, was someone he trusted absolutely. Someone who knew exactly how taxine works. Someone who had medical knowledge of the string and pencil trick, of the time rigor takes to set in, of how to create a perfect locked room. In short, Doctor, someone remarkably like you. Cavendish smiled faintly. You have no proof. I have better than proof, Poirot said. I have psychology. Tell me, Doctor, when Lord Birch summoned you last night, what did he wish to say? Cavendish's composure flickered. He sent no message. Yet he wrote in his journal only yesterday, tonight I tell him. Tell him what? That he was ready to acknowledge his son at last? Imagine the scene. You knock softly. He unbolts the door, gladly, eagerly. You sit together. He offers brandy. You refuse. You know what is in it. He drinks. He begins to speak of the new will, of making amends, and then the poison grips him. He realizes. He looks at you with those astonished eyes we saw. And you. What do? You light a cigarette, Doctor, and you watch your father die because acknowledgement without punishment is not enough for 18 years of exile. Cavendish's face had gone very white. That is a monstrous invention. Is it? Poirot lifted the cage cover. The dead raven stared with filmed eyes. You fed this bird to create your little drama in the garden. You wore a surgical glove, one finger tore. You left footprints that ended at the tree to incriminate Miss Wren. You placed the single berry in the wall safe to suggest the poison came from the library itself. All very clever. But you forgot one thing. He produced a small glass vial containing a few drops of colorless liquid. From the crème de menthe bottle in your surgery, Doctor. The same bottle that flavored the cigarette end in the library. And on the neck of that bottle, your fingerprint in green liqueur. Careless for a man who wore gloves everywhere else. Cavendish stared at the vial as though it were a snake. For a long moment no one moved. Then Cavendish laughed, soft, almost relieved. Bravo, Monsieur Poirot. You have constructed a perfect circle. But it is still only theory. You cannot prove I was in that room. Poirot's smile was almost tender. I do not need to. You have just proved it yourself. An innocent man would have demanded to know why I accused him. You, Docteur, simply asked for proof you already knew I possessed. Cavendish looked suddenly very tired. Touché. Lady Eleanor made a small animal sound of horror. Cavendish turned to her. I wanted him to know, Eleanor, just once, to look into my eyes and see his own guilt staring back. That was all I ever wanted. He reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for a silver cigarette case. He opened it, took out a cigarette, and rolled it thoughtfully between his fingers. Taxine, he said conversationally. One more berry, ground fine, soaked into the paper. Enough for a quick exit if the need arose. Hastings lunged. Jap was faster. The cigarette case clattered to the floor. Jap's handcuffs snapped shut. Cavendish did not resist. He looked at Poirot with something close to admiration. "You are everything they say, monsieur. I almost won." "Almost," Poirot agreed. "But murder is not a game one plays against, Hercule Poirot. It is a game one loses." As Japp led him away, Cavendish paused in the doorway. "Tell them to bury him beneath the yew," he said quietly. "Father and son together at last." The door closed. In the sudden silence, the raven's dead eyes seemed to blink once, as though satisfied. Chapter 8. The Birch Blood. They gathered in the long gallery at dawn because Poirot insisted on daylight for the final act. The tall east windows turned the polished floor to rose gold, and the ancestral portraits looked down with the weary resignation of those who have seen every human sin repeated across centuries. Poirot had placed a single chair in the center of the Turkey carpet. Upon it sat Dr. Miles Cavendish, wrists handcuffed in front of him, calm as a man waiting for a train he no longer wished to catch. Inspector Japp stood behind him. Lady Eleanor, Reginald, and Sylvia Wren formed a silent half-circle. Even Mrs. Inglethorpe had been summoned. She stood near the door like a black-draped statue. Poirot did not raise his voice. He spoke almost conversationally, yet every word carried to the rafters. "Mesdames, messieurs, the play is over. The curtain falls. Dr. Cavendish has confessed in private to Inspector Japp and to me. He will repeat it now, publicly, so that no one in this house may ever again whisper that justice was mistaken." Cavendish lifted his head. His eyes were bright, almost feverish. "There is little left to say, monsieur. You have seen through every layer of the onion. Yes, I killed him. I poisoned the brandy on Wednesday afternoon while the house was at tea. I sat with him on Thursday night and watched the taxine do its work. I staged the footprints, the raven, the torn glove, the note, everything, to point suspicion at Sylvia, at Reginald, anywhere but at the quiet doctor who had tended the family for 15 years. I wanted them to tear one another apart while I walked free, rich, acknowledged at last, childish perhaps, but I was tired of waiting." Lady Eleanor made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Tired of waiting? You were a parasite at my table for 15 years. Cavendish turned to her, almost gently. "And you, Eleanor, were the woman who paid a midwife to pronounce a living child dead, so that the Birch name would remain unsullied. You condemned me to an orphanage in Leeds while you played chatelaine. Did you never wonder why I chose to study medicine? So that one day I could stand at your bedside and decide whether you lived or died. Fate merely gave me a more satisfying patient." Reginald took a stumbling step forward, face purple. "You cold-blooded—" Japp's hand clamped his shoulder. "Easy, sir." Poirot raised a small hand for silence. "There is one final piece," he said. "The new will. Dr. Cavendish destroyed it, of course, but Lord Birch was thorough. He posted a duplicate to his solicitors the same day with instructions to open it only in the event of his sudden death. It arrived yesterday. Inspector Japp has it now." He nodded to Japp, who produced a long blue envelope sealed with red wax. The birch crest was impressed deep into the wax. Cavendish stared at it as though it were a loaded revolver. Poirot continued, "In it, Lord Birch acknowledges Dr. Miles Cavendish as his lawful son and heir to everything. Estate, investments, the house itself. Had he lived another week, the doctor would have inherited openly, honorably, without a drop of blood. Instead, he chose murder. The will becomes his indictment rather than his triumph." Cavendish gave a short, bitter laugh. "The irony is exquisite, is it not? I killed the only man who was finally prepared to call me son." Sylvia Wren spoke for the first time, her voice small but clear. "Why the raven? Why the footprints? Why make us suffer?" Cavendish looked at her almost with pity. Because suffering was the only inheritance I had ever received. I wanted every one of you to taste it before the end. Poirot moved to the great fireplace. Above it hung the portrait of Diana Birch, young, tragic, beautiful. He gestured toward it. Look well. This woman died believing her child had died with her. For 18 years she has watched from that frame while her son moved among us like a ghost. Last night, Doctor, when your father realized what you had done, he looked up at this portrait, did he not? That was the moment of astonishment we saw on his face. Not only betrayal by his son, but betrayal of the woman he had failed twice, once by abandoning her child, once by dying before he could make amends. Cavendish's composure cracked at last. His head dropped forward, the handcuffs rattled. Poirot's voice softened, almost paternal. You are a brilliant physician, Doctor. You could have saved lives. Instead, you chose to take one, the one life that mattered most to you. That is the real tragedy. He turned to the others. Lady Eleanor. The estate passes to the next male heir, Reginald, I believe, unless the crown contests the destroyed will. That is for lawyers now. Mademoiselle Wren, your legacy under the previous will stands. You are no longer penniless. And you, Mr. Reginald, perhaps a brush with ruin will teach you that forgery is less profitable than honest work. Reginald muttered something inaudible. Poirot addressed Japp. Take him away, Inspecteur. The assizes will do the rest. As Japp led Cavendish toward the door, the doctor paused beneath Diana's portrait. He looked up at it for a long moment. I'm sorry, Mother, he said quietly. I thought vengeance would feel like justice. It only feels like emptiness. Then he was gone. The gallery door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. Lady Eleanor sank onto a carved settle, suddenly frail. Sylvia began to cry, silently this time. Reginald stared at the floor as though it might open and swallow him. Poirot stood alone in the center of the room, small and immaculate, the only figure untouched by the storm he had unleashed. Hastings, who had watched everything from the shadow of a suit of armor, came forward. I say, Poirot, was there nothing else he could have done? Once his father was ready to acknowledge him. There is always something else, mon ami, Poirot replied. There is always the choice to forgive. Dr. Cavendish made the other choice. That is why he sits in handcuffs and we do not. He glanced once more at Diana's portrait. The painted eyes seemed less haunted now, as though a long vigil had ended. Come, Hastings. The air in this house is finished. Let us walk in the garden before the car comes. Even a yew tree looks less poisonous in daylight. They left the gallery together. Behind them, the portraits of 300 years of birches watched in silence, and somewhere in the distance a raven croaked once, a harsh, lonely sound that might almost have been farewell. Chapter 9. The smile of the yew. The library again, but now stripped of menace. The desk had been cleared, the decanter removed, the green-shaded lamp extinguished. Late afternoon sun slanted through the west window and laid a bar of dusty gold across the carpet, as though the room itself were exhaling. Dr. Miles Cavendish sat alone, wrists free for the first time in 24 hours. Inspector Japp had agreed to 10 private minutes with Poirot before the Black Maria arrived from Market Birchington. The handcuffs lay on the blotter like a discarded bracelet. Cavendish looked up as Poirot entered. He was pale, unshaven, yet strangely tranquil, the way a man looks after a long fever has finally broken. You wanted a last word, monsieur? Poirot closed the door softly and took the chair opposite. The same chair in which the murderer had sat while his father died. Only one question, Doctor. When it was finished, when he understood, did he speak your name? Cavendish's eyes, the exact gray-green of his mother's in the portrait, flickered with something that might have been pain. He tried. The taxine paralyzes the throat early. All that came was a sound. Half my name, half a prayer. Then he smiled. That terrible fixed smile you noticed. I think he was trying to say he was sorry. Or perhaps he was only relieved it was over. He gave a short, wondering laugh. I sat there for another 5 minutes, smoking that absurd cigarette, waiting to feel triumph. All I felt was the room growing colder. Poirot nodded slowly. You expected catharsis. You received emptiness. That is the murderer's true punishment, Doctor. The police, the rope, the cell, these are formalities. The real sentence is carried inside. Cavendish looked toward the window where the U was visible, black against the pale sky. I used to play beneath that tree when I was a boy sent here for summer holidays, before anyone knew who I was. I thought it was beautiful. I didn't know it was waiting for me. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice dropping to a whisper. Do you know the worst part, Poirot? When I was 12, my foster mother told me my real parents had died in the war. I made up a story that my father was a hero. I carried that story like a talisman. When I learned the truth that he had paid to be rid of me, I kept the talisman anyway. I told myself that one day he would ride back and claim me. I waited 18 years for a man who never intended to come until it was convenient for him. And when he finally did, I killed him for it. His fingers found the cigarette case Jap had returned to him. He opened it, looked at the single remaining cigarette, plain paper now, no green stain, and closed it again. I could end it here, you know. 1 bite and 30 seconds of convulsions, quicker than the hangman. Poirot's gaze did not waver. But you will not, because that would be one more cowardice, and you have decided to stop being a coward. You will stand in the dock and speak your mother's name aloud, so that the world finally knows she bore a living son. That is the only amends left to you. Cavendish studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, exhausted nod. You are merciless, monsieur. But you are right. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the U. The wind had risen, the branches moved like slow arms. I used to think blood called to blood, he said. Now I think it only bleeds. The door opened. Jap entered with 2 constables. Time, sir. Cavendish turned. For the first time he looked almost young. Goodbye, Monsieur Poirot. Thank you for refusing to let me die a liar as well as a murderer. Poirot inclined his head. Bon voyage, docteur. May you find on the other side of the rope the mercy you denied your father. They led him away. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, steady, unhurried. Poirot remained alone in the library. He moved to the desk, opened the journal to the final entry, and read once more the dying scrawl. Cavendish knows. Must make provision before it is too late. With a fountain pen, he added a single line beneath in his neat continental hand. Too late. By 24 hours and 18 years. He closed the journal, placed it exactly in the center of the blotter, and left the room without looking back. Outside, the Black Maria crunched across the gravel. Lady Eleanor stood on the steps, rigid, watching the car disappear between the avenue of beeches. Reginald was nowhere to be seen. Rumor said he had already telephoned his bookmaker to place the winnings he no longer feared losing. Sylvia Wren had gone to the village church to light a candle for a soul she had both hated and loved. Poirot joined Hastings beside the Daimler. All finished? Hastings asked. All finished, Poirot replied. The U has claimed its sacrifice. The house will belong to banks and death duties now. In 10 years, the roof will fall in and the ravens will nest in the long gallery. Sic transit gloria mundi. Hastings glanced at him anxiously. You're very quiet, old chap. Poirot twirled his mustache, a ghost of his usual vanity. I am thinking, Hastings, that there are murders which begin with a single lie told in a birthing room in 1917 and end with a man walking to the gallows because he could not forgive his father for being human. Somewhere between those two moments lies the whole tragedy of the human heart. He climbed into the car. Come. London awaits. And somewhere a criminal still believes himself cleverer than Hercule Poirot. Let us disappoint him. As the Daimler purred down the drive, the ancient yew lifted its poisoned branches to the sky. A single purple berry fell, rolled across the grass, and came to rest against the foundation stone of the house. In the walled garden, a raven landed beside the fallen fruit, cocked its glossy head, and decided wisely that some inheritances are best refused. The wind carried the scent of taxine across the lawns, faint but unmistakable, like the last note of a requiem played on a violin strung with guilt. And somewhere very far away a clock began to strike the hour that no one in Birchwood Manor would ever forget. Chapter 10. Little Gray Cells and Ancient Trees. 2 days later the frost came hard. Birchwood Manor stood white and silent, its chimneys smokeless, its windows blind. The police had gone. The journalists had been bought off or driven away. Only a single constable remained on duty at the gate, stamping his feet and dreaming of cocoa. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings walked the gravel paths one last time before the London train. They had stayed on at Lady Eleanor's stiff invitation, part gratitude, part defiance, sleeping in vast bedrooms where the fires never quite warmed the air and the portraits watched like unpaid creditors. They paused now beneath the yew. The tree had been condemned. Tomorrow the woodman would come with saws and ropes. Already a red X had been painted on the trunk, a wound against the dark bark. The branches hung lower than ever, as though the tree sensed its own execution. Hastings kicked at a fallen berry. Ghastly thing. Ought to dig it up by the roots and burn it. Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. The yew was here before the birches and will be here long after. It did not poison Lord Archibald, it merely supplied the weapon. Like the revolver that lies in a drawer until a human hand lifts it. He looked up into the black foliage. 300 years of weddings, christenings, funerals. It has seen every birch sin and kept them all. That is why they chose it for their crest. Not pride, Hastings, but warning. A sudden clatter of wings. A pair of ravens rose from the upper branches, circled once, and flew toward the woods. Their cries sounded almost like laughter. Off to find a new home, Hastings said. Can't say I blame them. They walked on past the walled garden where the potting shed door swung forlornly in the wind. The spode cup had been smashed, the mortar scoured, the torn glove and the dead raven taken away in evidence boxes. Yet the smell of yew still lingered, sharp and funereal. At the front steps, Lady Eleanor waited, muffled in sable against the cold. She looked smaller now, as though the house had begun to shrink her to fit its coming emptiness. You leave us, Mr. Poirot. Alas, madam, even the little gray cells must eat. London calls. She held out a gloved hand. I have no words adequate. You gave us justice, and justice in this house has always been a rare visitor. Poirot bowed over her hand with antique grace. Justice is merely truth in action, madame. Sometimes the truth is unkind, but it is never cruel. Her mouth twisted. Reginald has already ordered a new motor car. Sylvia is packing for the Riviera with what remains of her legacy, and I shall stay until the bailiffs come. After that, she lifted one shoulder, a gesture centuries old. There are always cousins in reduced circumstances who need a companion who knows which fork to use. Poirot studied her for a moment, then reached into his overcoat and produced a small leather folder. Inside lay a single sheet of heavy paper. Your brother's duplicate will, madame, the one posted to his solicitors. It reached Scotland Yard this morning. Dr. Cavendish signed a statement refusing all claim. The estate reverts to the last valid will, the one that leaves you life tenancy and a competent income. Not riches, perhaps, but dignity. Lady Eleanor stared at the document as though it might vanish. Her hand trembled as she took it. Miles refused everything? He has decided, Poirot said gently, that some inheritances are poisoned at the root. He prefers to leave with nothing but the truth. For the first time in days, Lady Eleanor's eyes filled. She turned away quickly, pressing the will to her heart. Inside the hall, Mrs. Inglethorpe waited with their luggage. The old housekeeper's face was expressionless, but when Poirot passed, she slipped something into his gloved hand. A sprig of yew, 3 dark needles, and 1 glossy berry tied with black thread. "For remembrance, sir," she whispered. "His lordship always said the tree knew the family better than we knew ourselves." Poirot accepted it gravely. "Merci, madame. I shall keep it beside my crucifix, a reminder that death and resurrection grow on the same branch." The Daimler stood ready. As they drove beneath the avenue of beeches, Hastings glanced back. Lady Eleanor remained on the steps, straight and solitary, the will clutched like a banner. Behind her, the great door of Birchwood Manor closed with a thud that echoed across the frost. Halfway to the station, Poirot took the yew sprig from his pocket and studied it. "You were right, Hastings. The tree did not kill Lord Archibald. But it kept the appointment all the same. The Greeks called you the smiling death." Father and son met beneath its shadow at last. Both smiling, neither happy. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "Deuced morbid, if you ask me." "Truth often is," Poirot replied. "But consider. Dr. Cavendish will hang, yet in dying he has given his father the one thing Archibald most desired. Someone to carry the Birch blood forward, even if only to a prison yard and a length of rope. And Lady Eleanor, who tried to bury that blood 18 years ago, now lives because of it. The yew keeps its own justice." The train whistle sounded in the distance. Poirot tucked the sprig carefully into his waistcoat pocket next to his heart. "Come, mon ami. Another chapter ends, another begins. Somewhere a criminal is already planning the perfect crime, convinced that this time no little Belgian will interfere. Let us disappoint him." The Daimler turned onto the high road. Behind them, Birchwood Manor dwindled to a gray shape against the white fields. The condemned yew a dark scratch against the sky. And if in the walled garden a single new shoot pushed through the frozen earth where the raven had fallen, green, tenacious, already forming its first deadly bud, no one was there to see it. The tree had all the time in the world.